Welcome to Cinema Bites, your go-to for movie recaps in a flash. Big twists, epic moments, all in just minutes. The movie begins with a girl named Sarah, who has a son named Chris. They move to a country house because of her separation from her husband, but she does not tell her son that they have separated so that his psychological state does not become bad, and she says that your father will live with us after a temporary period. On their way to the country house, Sarah wanted to support a person standing in the middle of the road, so she got out of the car in order to see if anything happened to him or he was hurt. An old woman named Noreen appeared and walked towards her. She heard her say that this is not her son, and she started to get closer to her to reassure herself of what she said. But Noreen did not look at her, and she kept looking at Chris in a strange and frightening way. She panics and starts getting closer to her to make sure of what she said. But Noreen doesn't look at her, and she keeps staring at Chris in a strange and frightening way. So, Sarah becomes afraid for her son, quickly returns to the car, and leaves. She then arrives at the country house and stays there with her son. But as days go by, she notices that raising a child without a father is very difficult. This is what causes Sarah and Chris to always have a troubled relationship, especially with Chris's strange eating behaviors. But Sarah manages to calm things down, hugs her son, and tells him, "I love you." During this, she plays a game with him and makes funny faces, and they keep laughing and their mood improves. The next day, while they're having lunch, Sarah hears Chris screaming. When she goes to him, she sees a spider in the kitchen. She catches the spider and takes it outside, but Chris refuses and tells her, "If you leave it, it will come back to the house," and gets angry at her, saying, "If my dad was here, he would have killed it." Sarah tells him that the situation is complicated here, and Chris understands that his father will never come back. Afterwards, he goes and steps on the spider, saying, "You're lying to me," and runs towards the forest. Sarah runs after him and feels that the more she runs, the stronger the wind gets. But suddenly she stops because she sees something scary and astonishing. She notices that she has dug big trenches in the ground. Chris comes after her and says, "I'm sorry," because he knows his father used to abuse him psychologically and physically. She hugs him, is affected by his words, and takes him away before he sees the hole and is amazed. On the same night, Sarah hears the back door of the house closing. She goes to check it and then goes to sleep. The next day, Chris goes to school. But the first day is tough for him because he's alone and doesn't have friends. Meanwhile, his mother sees an ad for a talent competition at the school. Sarah tells him to participate so he can make friends and have more fun, and she tries to convince him, but Chris is hesitant. Then we see Sarah having dinner with her new friends, including her boss, Louise. They talk about the old lady Noreen, and Sarah learns her story. Everyone calls her Crazy Noreen. We learn that Noreen had a young son named James, and she used to say, "This is not my son." And the situation was so scary that all the teachers gathered to get her out. Her son then transferred to another school, and she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. Sarah starts hearing strange and frightening noises, including sounds coming from her son's room. When she goes to Chris's room, she doesn't find him there or anywhere in the house. Afraid for her son, Sarah goes downstairs, finds the door open, grabs a flashlight, and searches for him outside. The forest is very dark and scary, and her fear increases with the strange sounds she hears. Sarah decides to return home and calls the police to report her son missing. But in the middle of the call, she is surprised to find Chris in front of her. She asks him where he was, and he says, "I was in my room and didn't leave." All this prompts Sarah to see a psychiatrist for treatment. The doctor asks her if there is any family history of mental illness, but she says there isn't. He examines the scar on her head from an accident she had a year ago, then prescribes her sedatives to take before sleeping. When she returns home, she calls Chris for dinner but is surprised to find him standing in the kitchen. At this point, Sarah feels she must take her medication and starts taking it before sleeping. The next day, she wakes up to find Chris sitting next to her, holding a bouquet of flowers he picked from the forest. She gets upset and angry at him for going out alone, but then takes the flowers, thanks him, hugs him, and asks him not to go out alone again. After some time, she goes to pick Chris up from school and sees him laughing with new friends, including one who always bullies him. On their way home, old lady Noreen appears again, and she and Chris exchange strange and frightening looks. Sarah doesn't know how to get rid of her, so she gets out of the car to ask her to leave, but she hears her say again, "That's not your son." At that moment, Noreen's husband appears and apologizes to Sarah for his wife's behavior. Noreen takes the chance to go to Chris, starts banging on the car hood, yelling, "That's not your son," and begins screaming in a frightening way, banging her head on the hood to break it. Her husband pulls her away from the car, and Sarah drives away quickly to get away from her. The next morning, Sarah takes her son to school. When she returns, she goes to Noreen's house, gets closer, and finds Noreen dead, with only her head buried in the ground. Meanwhile, the police come to Sarah's house to question her because she was near Noreen's house. Sarah notices the officer playing with Chris and then imagines Chris's superhuman strength to the point that he breaks the officer's arm while playing. But it turns out all of this is Sarah's imagination. Sarah goes to take a shower, but while drying off, she sees the accident spot and blood coming out of it, but she doesn't know why. The next day, she goes to work and her boss Louise talks to her about Noreen. She notices that the house is full of mirrors, all covered in black cloth out of mourning for Noreen. Noreen's husband offers Sarah a drink, and she asks him why Noreen kept saying, "That's not your son." He tells her that Noreen did the same thing with her son James when he was 8 because she noticed changes in his personality and then started accusing him of not being her son, calling him an imposter. We learn that Noreen's husband was the one driving the car when James was hit, but they all blamed Noreen for the accident. Sarah tries to live her life normally and returns to exercising. But while in the forest, she finds Chris's favorite toy near a big hole. When she looks into the hole, she hears strange and frightening, incomprehensible sounds. Sarah returns home and is surprised to see Chris devouring the food he used to hate. She asks Chris about his toy and whether he took it out of the house without her knowledge, but he denies it and says, "My toy is in the house, I didn't take it out." Sarah shows him the toy and says, "I found it in the forest." Chris gets angry, throws the food tray at her forcefully, and it's the first time she's seen him like this. Chris realizes his mistake, apologizes to his mother, and goes to his room. That night, Sarah hears a strange sound coming from Chris's room. She quietly goes and peeks under the door and is shocked to see Chris walking on his tiptoes. Then she sees him pick up a spider from the floor and eat it. Sarah is terrified by the scene and can't bear it, so she makes a noise, and Chris hears it and comes out of the room. Sarah quickly returns to her room. Chris confronts her, but she responds normally. The next day, Sarah takes her son to the psychiatrist, who examines him and tells her that he's fine and there's nothing wrong with him. The doctor focuses on her condition and asks if the injury to your head was the result of the accident, or your husband was the one who caused it when he hit you. Afterwards, he insisted that you must take the medication before sleeping so your condition would improve. Meanwhile, Sarah buys a camera and puts it in Chris's room. On that day, she decides not to take the medication. At the end of the day, Sarah goes to a party for Chris and his friends, which is basically a singing party, and their song is about the pit in the swamp. But suddenly, everyone at the party gets scared, and only Chris and his mother are left singing in a strange and terrifying voice. She quickly leaves the school but doesn't know how to open the exit door. Then Louise comes after her to find out what's wrong. But there Conrad tells Sarah that Chris is not her son. After that, Chris comes with the teacher. But Sarah leaves them and goes home by car to turn on the camera, trying to figure out what happened. When she watches the recording, she gets even more terrified and doesn't know what to do. So she goes to the old lady, Noreen, and tells her about the situation. Noreen tells her the secret of the mirrors in the house because only the mirrors show the truth. They keep watching the video recorded by the cameras. Meanwhile, Chris arrives home and starts blaming his mother for leaving him alone at the party. She says, "I left you because I was tired." Chris goes to her and hugs her. At dinner, it turns out that Sarah was putting sedatives in Chris's food, and for the second time, Chris eats the food he hated. After he finishes the meal, Sarah asks him to play her favorite game with her, but it becomes clear that he doesn't remember the game. So Sarah tells him, "You're not my son." Suddenly, Chris turns violent and aggressive, attacks Sarah, and hits her hard on the ground until she passes out. When Sarah wakes up from the blackout, she finds Chris dragging her and taking her to the forest, forcing her head into the ground just like what happened to Noreen. At this point, the sedative starts to work on Chris, and he collapses before he can bury her. Sarah manages to pull her head out and drags Chris back to the house. She tries to check his face in the broken car mirror, but is shocked when she sees a strange creature, not her son. Suddenly, the creature gets up and attacks Sarah again, but she manages to hit him, and he starts screaming in a demonic voice. Sarah runs to the door, locks him inside, and since the strange creature is locked in the room, Sarah decides to go look for the real Chris in the forest. She uses a flashlight until she reaches the pit and goes down into it. She finds a tunnel underground, crawls through the narrow tunnel until she comes out into a larger space, finds lots of human skeletons, and sees Chris unconscious. She carries him to get out, but discovers they are not alone. She realizes this when strange creatures appear in front of her and start chasing her. Despite the difficulty of the situation, Sarah manages to escape with her son, but the creatures cannot follow except for one. When it grabs Sarah's hand, it transforms completely into her. Sarah hits it with the flashlight until it lets go of her. Then she gets out of the pit and tries to wake Chris up to make sure he is still alive. She goes to the car to escape, but realizes the car key is in the house. She decides to leave Chris beside the car and goes back to the house to get the key. There, she hears the strange creature calling out to her, and she has no choice but to take drastic action to escape safely. She decides to burn the whole house down. After that, she manages to escape with her son from the haunted place. Weeks later, we see Sarah and Chris starting a new and happy life in the city. To be sure Chris is the real one, she takes photos of him all the time and fills the house with mirrors because mirrors always reveal the truth. And here, the movie ends. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to get more new videos.